Most folks believe you need a fortune to walk away from work in your prime. They picture snapping up a stack of rental homes, turning into some kind of property tycoon, or cashing in on a trust fund handed down by rich parents. But what if I told you that wrapping up your career early through real estate could come down to buying a single house? What if the real key to financial freedom isn't piling up a giant portfolio, but instead making one smart, deliberate move that almost everybody walks right past? My name is Nick, and I show people how plain, no nonsense real estate moves can build the kind of wealth that flips your whole life around. If you're worn out by the old school retirement script that chains you to a desk until you're 70, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tap that like button if this helps you shake loose from the herd mentality. Let me share something that may catch you off guard. While the crowd is sprinting after the hottest investment fad or trying to outguess the stock market, there's a no-frills real estate move that has quietly turned more regular folks into financially free people than just about any other path out there. It doesn't ask you to be a landlord juggling dozens of renters, and it doesn't force you to flip houses or decode tangled real estate markets. Honestly, it's so plain that most people brush it off completely because they're hunting for something fancier. The move I'm describing comes down to buying one carefully picked house and applying a method that the vast majority of homeowners never even think about. This isn't about grabbing the priciest place your budget allows or sniffing out some buried treasure in a neighborhood on the rise. It's about grasping how real estate can go to work for you in ways that stretch way past plain appreciation or rental checks. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, let me sketch out what this actually looks like in real life. Picture owning a place that not only gives you a roof over your head, but also throws off enough passive income to cover every one of your bills inside 15 to 20 years. Picture having the freedom to step away from work in your 40s or 50s, not because Aunt Edna left you cash or you scratched a winning lottery ticket, but because you made one sharp real estate call back in your 20s or 30s. This might sound like a fairy tale, especially if you've always heard that real estate investing demands a pile of cash, spotless credit, or years under your belt. The honest truth is that this move works for everyday people pulling everyday paychecks who simply get how to squeeze one property for everything it's worth in a remarkable way. The bedrock of this whole thing rests on what folks call house hacking, but we're going to push it a good deal further than most people ever dare. Run-of-the-mill house hacking means buying a duplex or some multi-unit place, parking yourself in one unit, and renting out the rest. That's a sound play, sure, but what I'm about to walk you through can work with a plain single-family home and can pack an even bigger punch over the long haul. Here's the spot where most people trip up. They size up real estate strictly by monthly cash flow, fixating on whether a rental will toss them a couple $100 of profit each month. Cash flow matters, no doubt, but it isn't the main engine of wealth in this play. The real muscle comes from stacking several wealth-building forces that most investors never fully tap into. The first force is what I call strategic appreciation. This isn't crossing your fingers and hoping your home's value climbs, though it most likely will as the years roll on. Instead, it's buying in places where appreciation is steadier and more dependable. That means scouting properties near booming job hubs, planned infrastructure work, or pockets where housing supply is naturally pinched. But here's where it gets juicy. Most people buy a house, settle in for 30 years, and finally own it outright. They figure that's the smart play because they've wiped out their housing bill. What slips right past them is that they've locked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in an asset that's no longer pulling any weight for them. The play I'm teaching flips that whole script. Rather than paying off your house and patting yourself on the back, you tap the equity you've built to pick up extra income producing assets. This sparks what I call a wealth multiplication effect, where your one house turns into the launching pad for an entire financial empire. Let me lay out step by step exactly how this runs. You kick things off by buying a property that checks specific boxes. First, it has to sit in an area with hungry rental demand. That doesn't mean the swankiest part of town. Often the sweet spot is in solid middle class areas where working folks want to live, but maybe aren't ready to buy just yet. Second, the property should leave room for improvement. That doesn't mean you've got to morph into a contractor or sink months into renovations. Easy upgrades like swapping out fixtures, sprucing up the curb appeal, or smoothing out the layout can bump up both the rent you collect and the home's value. Third, and this one's huge, you've got to buy at the right price. That means staying patient and holding out for the right shot instead of pouncing on the first place that catches your eye. The gap between paying full market price and snagging a deal can literally add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars across the lifetime of your investment. Once the property's yours, here's where the real magic kicks in. Rather than just pocketing rent and praying for appreciation, you roll up your sleeves and manage the investment to wring out its full potential. That could mean smart renovations, fine-tuning your rent rates, or even turning dead space into extra rental dollars. But the true breakthrough lands when you figure out how to put your growing equity to work. As your property climbs in value and you chip away at the mortgage, you're building wealth on two tracks at the same time. The appreciation pumps up your net worth, while every mortgage payment fattens your ownership share. After a handful of years, you'll be sitting on serious equity that most people just leave parked there, gathering dust. This is the moment the retirement clock starts speeding up. Rather than letting that equity stay boxed in, you can pull it out through refinancing or a home equity line of credit. But here's the trick. You don't blow this money on splurges or lifestyle upgrades. You funnel it straight into more income-producing assets. Those extra assets don't have to be more real estate, though they sure can be. You might park money in dividend-paying stocks, bonds, or even fire up a business. The whole point is that you're using the equity from your one house to spin up several income streams. As these income streams swell, something pretty incredible unfolds. Your total passive income starts inching toward and eventually blows past your living costs. When your investments crank out enough money to handle your basics, you've hit what most people call financial independence. You can keep grinding away if you love the work, but you're no longer tied to a paycheck just to keep the lights on. The timeline for all this shifts depending on where you start, the property you land, and how hard you chase the strategy. Some folks reach financial independence in 10 to 15 years, while others might need 20 to 25 years. Either way, it's leaps and bounds quicker than the worn-out 40-year retirement grind. What makes this play so potent is that it doesn't force you to torch your quality of life or pinch pennies like a monk for decades. You're living in a nice home, stacking equity, and growing wealth all at once. You're not stuck picking between enjoying life right now and locking down your money future. You're knocking out both side by side. The mental upside matters every bit as much as the money side. When you know your housing setup is not just handled but actively cranking out wealth, it reshapes how you view money and what's ahead. You build the kind of confidence that flows from knowing you're marching toward financial freedom even before you fully arrived. That confidence often steers you toward better career calls, smarter bets, and chances that would never land in the lap of someone scraping by paycheck to paycheck. With a base of real estate equity beneath you, you can take that role packing more upside but a little less safety. You can launch that business you've always daydreamed about because you know your housing tab is already covered. Most people never catch on that their biggest money blunder isn't what they buy, it's what they failed to do with what they already own. While your neighbors fret over their 401k contributions and bicker about index funds versus picking individual stocks, you're perched on what might be the single most powerful wealth building tool they'll never wrap their heads around. The real beauty of this single house play is that it grows right alongside your life. When you're young and just getting going, maybe you're house hacking by renting rooms to buddies or landing a duplex where you live in one half. As you age and your income swells, you might step up to a bigger place and rent out that whole first house. The key is that every move stacks on the last one, building a snowball effect that most people totally miss. And here's where it gets seriously interesting and where most real estate gurus flat out drop the ball. They're forever yammering about buying more properties, hoarding rental units, and morphing into some real estate empire kingpin. But what they conveniently leave out is that running a stack of properties can swallow your life like a full-time job. Wrangling tenant headaches, repair nightmares, and empty units across a dozen properties is hardly the breezy passive income dreamland they pitch. The one house play dodges every bit of that mess. You're not aiming to be a career landlord or a real estate mogul. You're just squeezing the most out of one well-picked property while keeping your life under control and your stress dialed down. Let me hand you a real-world example of how this shakes out. Say you buy a house for $420,000 when you're 30 years old. You put down 20%, so your mortgage sits at $336,000. Over the next 10 years, two things happen at the same time. The house climbs at a modest 4% a year, lifting its value to roughly $620,000. Meanwhile, your mortgage balance shrinks to about $270,000 thanks to your monthly payments. Now, here's where most people make their fatal slip. They eyeball their situation and think, sweet, I've got $350,000 in equity. I should knock out the rest of my mortgage and own this place free and clear. It feels safe and grown up, and your grandmother would probably beam with pride, but it's honestly one of the worst money moves you could pull. Rather than trapping that equity in your house where it earns you zilch, you could tap into it through refinancing or a home equity line of credit. Let's say you pull out $200,000 of that equity. Now you've got cash to invest while still keeping a sensible loan to value ratio on your main home. Here's where the magic kicks in. That $200,000 invested conservatively at 7% a year throws off about $14,000 annually in passive income. That's nearly $1,200 a month landing in your pocket that wasn't there before, all because you understood how to put your equity to work instead of letting it snooze, but we're just warming up. As your house keeps climbing and you keep whittling down the mortgage, your equity piles up even faster. In another 5 years, you might have enough equity to yank out another $150,000. Now, your passive income leaps to over $2,400 a month. The snowball really picks up speed from here. Your investments are growing, your property is climbing, and your mortgage balance is melting away. By the time you hit 50, that single house you grabbed at 30 could be pumping out enough passive income to handle a hefty chunk of your living costs. What's genuinely striking is how this play bends to fit different stages and circumstances of life. If you're single and just starting out, you might buy a small house and rent out the spare rooms. If you're married with kids, you might pick a bigger place in a strong school district that's likely to appreciate nicely over time. If you're inching toward retirement, you might zero in on properties in places where you genuinely want to plant roots for the long haul. That flexibility is exactly what makes this approach so powerful. You're not boxed into some stiff investment formula that only pays off under flawless conditions. You're laying down a foundation that can shift along with your life while steadily stacking wealth in the background. Now, I can already hear what some of you are thinking. What about the risks? What if the real estate market tanks? What if interest rates blast through the roof? What if your area slides into an economic slump? Those are fair worries, and anybody swearing real estate is risk-free is just trying to sell you something. But here's what's fascinating about the one house play. It's actually tougher against these risks than most people figure. Unlike someone juggling 10 rental properties and leaning entirely on rental checks, you've got flexibility. If the market goes soft, you can shift your approach. If rates climb hard, you can pay down debt instead of piling on more leverage. Like if your area hits an economic rough patch, you've got options that someone with a stack of properties simply doesn't. The mental side of this can't be played down either. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing your housing setup isn't just squared away, but is actively cranking out your wealth. While your coworkers gripe about rent hikes or mortgage bills, you're watching your net worth swell month after month, year after year. That peace of mind spills over into sharper decision making everywhere else in your life. When you're not sweating housing costs or fretting over retirement, you can take measured chances that swing open bigger doors, like pushing harder for that promotion, kicking off a side business, or finally making the career switch you've been chewing on. The ripple effects pile up over time. Better career moves lead to higher income, which can throw your wealth building into an even higher gear. The confidence that springs from financial security cracks open doors that stay bolted shut for folks living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe most important of all, this play trains you to think like a wealthy person instead of just scrambling to stockpile money like everyone else. Wealthy people get that assets should work for them, not the other way around. They know that equity locked in a house is just as worthless as cash crammed under a mattress. They put their assets to work on purpose to spin up multiple income streams and build wealth that actually lasts. The one house retirement play isn't really about real estate. It's about growing a mindset that spots opportunity where everyone else sees walls, that prizes cash flow over net worth bragging rights, and that puts long-term wealth ahead of instant gratification. Once you truly get this approach, you realize that early retirement isn't about stashing millions in the bank. It's about spinning up enough passive income to cover your bills while keeping the freedom to chase work you actually love. It's about having options instead of obligations, choices instead of chains. This is exactly why the old guard financial advice machine doesn't want this play on your radar. Chew on it for a second. If everybody grasped that they could retire early with just one house, who'd still need those pricey financial advisors raking in 2% a year to babysit their retirement accounts? Who'd buy all those tangled investment products loaded with hidden fees and so-so returns? The financial services crowd feeds on complexity and confusion. They want you convinced that building wealth takes slick strategies, perfect market timing, and pro management. The truth is, some of the most effective wealth building moves are so plain that a teenager could nail them. The trouble is, simple doesn't move expensive courses or rack up never-ending management fees. Let me lay out what unfolds when you actually run this play across a 20-year stretch. The numbers might knock you back, especially when you stack them against what most people end up with following the standard retirement gospel. Remember our example from before? You bought that $420,000 house at 30. By age 50, here's what your money picture could look like. Your original house is now worth roughly $760,000, banking on that modest 4% yearly appreciation. Your mortgage balance has dropped to about $120,000, leaving you with over $640,000 in equity. But here's where it gets interesting. Over those 20 years, you've smartly tapped your growing equity 3 separate times to make extra investments. The first time at age 40, you pulled out $200,000 and invested it conservatively. By age 50, that investment has grown to roughly $395,000. The second time at age 45, you tapped another $150,000 of equity. That investment is now worth about $210,000. And just last year, you did it once more, pulling out $100,000 for your latest investment. Your total investment portfolio outside your house is now worth over $700,000. At a conservative 4% withdrawal rate, that's kicking off $28,000 a year in passive income. Toss in the rental income from your house if you've decided to live somewhere else, and you could easily be staring at $40,000 to $50,000 a year in passive income. But hold on, there's more. And I promise this isn't some late night infomercial pitch, even if the results look too good to be real. Done. That equity in your house isn't just sitting around looking pretty. It's on call for future investments, business shots, or whatever curveball life hurls at you. You've basically built your own personal bank with over $600,000 in available credit. Stack this up against your coworker who towed the traditional line. They've been maxing out their 401k for 20 years, kicking in about $7,000 a year. With employer matching and market returns, they might have $400,000 saved. That sounds fine until you realize they've poured over $140,000 of their own cash into it to get there. Meanwhile, you've built way more wealth largely on other people's money through mortgages and leverage. The mental gap is massive too. Your coworker is petrified of market crashes because their whole retirement hangs on stock market performance. You're sleeping like a baby, knowing that even if the stock market vanished overnight, you'd still own a valuable hunk of real estate that people need for shelter. Like, try chewing on a stock certificate when times get rough and see how far that gets you. Here's something that most real estate teachers completely whiff on, and it's probably the most important piece of this whole strategy. The aim isn't to turn into a real estate investor in the usual sense. The aim is to use real estate as a tool to reach financial independence as fast and as safely as you possibly can. There's a world of difference between those two approaches. The beauty of this play is that it's hiding right out in the open. While everyone else is squabbling over crypto versus stocks or arguing about the perfect asset mix, you could be quietly stacking wealth with something as dull as buying one house. Sometimes the most game-changing ideas are the ones that make your accountant yawn. That said, let's be straight about the lay of the land today. In 2025, this play runs into some real hurdles compared to back when housing was cheaper. The median home price now tops $400,000, and mortgage rates are floating around 6.5 to 7% instead of those rock bottom rates we saw not long ago. That means the cost of getting in the door is a lot steeper than it once was. But here's the thing. The core of the strategy stays every bit as powerful. If anything, the higher prices and rates make the equity building piece even more valuable once you're in the game. Yeah, you'll need a bigger income or some creative financing to get rolling, but the wealth building upside is actually larger because you're starting with a more valuable asset. The key is grasping that while the play is harder to launch in 2025, it's far from impossible. You might need to scout areas a bit outside the major metro centers, hunt for properties with house hacking potential, or stay more patient while you track down the right deal. But for those who can handle the steeper entry costs, the long-term payoff could be even sweeter than it was in decades past. So quit waiting around for the perfect moment or the perfect property. Start hunting for that one house that will flip everything. Your future self will thank you, and your present self might actually have fun with the ride. Because retiring early shouldn't mean living like a hermit or becoming a real estate mogul. Sometimes you just need to be sharp enough to let one house carry the load.